The Tatar commander Subai also set up Camp 15 Chukraim versts east of the river, where he stationed 20,000 Tatars, Mongols, 15,000 Kyrgyz and 20,000 Mihan infantry. To attack the Saklans and Ak-Bulgarians, he sent 5,000 Tatars to Chopri, Jeeb, 50,000 Turkmen to Kushbird and 20,000 Qyrgyz to Kutlubag. Never before or since have the Tatars attacked with such large forces. There was a wide, but not deep, depression 3 chakrams east of the river, the descent into which of the head of the Tatar army served as a signal for Yunus to the Saklan Bulgarian attack. He hoisted the banner of Kizil Barrage, the Red Dragon, a red orb with stripes at the top, and the Saklan of Auden were the first to march from their place and begin to cross the river. One chakram from the Padina, 55,000 Saklan and Ak-Bulgarians galloped into the Tatar formation that started to climb out of the Padina. As Yunus correctly read it, the Tatars emerging from the Padina failed to properly prepare to fire and came under the terrible blow of the strongest Saklan Bulgarian cavalry in the whole world. Never since then have either the Ishkuls or the Ak-Bulgarians had such a magnificent cavalry. No enraged tigers and lions could match the victory-hungry Saklan and Ak-Bulgarians. The Tatars coming out of the Padina were trampled and thrown back into the Padina, and the Saklan Bulgarian cavalry, like a waterfall, rushed over the Padina. From above, the Tatars were fired upon by the AC Bulgarian archers, and not an arrow fell in vain. An unprecedented logging began, which can only be compared to the Hud-Alan logging, the Catalan battle of 451. Here Auden and Yunus were the Attalites, their warriors the happy hunters, and the Tatars there hunted. As soon as the last Tatars of Chapai fell, defeated by the Baranjars of Nardugan and the Burtas of Yunus, the enemies too began to fall back. Had Kharasan struck from behind in the rear, not a single Tatar would have escaped alive. But the traitor Kharasan, on arriving at the camp of Subjatay, surrendered to him 5,000 of his own and 5,000 of Kalgan's Kalaks, and with the rest of the Kalaks went beyond the Shi-Don, in the role of a friend of Ak-Bulgar. The needy governor of Sarshin, Duga, gladly accepted Kharasan's detachment into his army, and then no one knew of Kharasan and Kalgan's treachery. Kharasan told Yunus later that he had attacked Subatai's headquarters, but was defeated and retreated beyond the Shire, and Yunus believed it. Urin Kate, the son of Subiatai, once remembered in conversation with Ghazi-Baba about this incident, and acquainted him with the following: "When my father, Subiatai, saw Kharasan's Bezerman, Bulgarians, galloping towards our camp, he said to me, 'This is how our death gallops.'" But it turned out that it was Kharasan, the secret ally of the Tatars. Having received from him a Tumen, Subiatai immediately sent him together with 15,000 Kyrgyz to the aid of Kushbird. Kushbird, leaving shelter, was already retreating when fresh Tatar forces struck at Auden's flank and began to press him. Yunus, having cut down the Tatar shelter, wanted to turn around and help Auden, but Sarmiaf was attacked by Kushbird, who had returned to the battlefield. Seeing that the job was complicated, Yunus and Auden called up the reserve so that under their protection they could retreat a little and bring their regiments into line. In that moment the traitor Kalgan with his men turned in panic flight, so that Timjan's blow only succeeded for a time in checking the enemy's onslaught. This time was enough for Baris, Yunus, and Auden to realize that the enemy had unexpectedly gained a great advantage and would inevitably defeat the Saklan Bulgarian army. Bardaeus, the most valiant and cold-blooded Ishkul, Russian, emir, left with him in the Tabaira only the Barajars of Nardugan, the Beeksender, Andrei, and Iskonder, Alexander Dubrovsky, and ordered all the other cavalrymen of the Saklani to retreat. In spite of the wild cries of the Tatars, pressing Timzan and the Ak-Bulgarians, each of the cooling-off Saklan Beks, Auden, Subai, Danil, Bulgar, Chumbash Bulima, Chubati Vladimir Rurikovich, Kanil, Sviatoslav Kanevsky, Yushuga, Young Igor, Izar Slaving Verovich, Shambat, Sviatoslav Shumsky, Atil Nishkala, Yuri Nezvizky, and others, fell on their knees before Baris and said, "Forgive us, Dad." And he replied to each, "God will forgive." At which they all wept. When Yunus asked Auden what this meant, he replied, "We are leaving Baris with his loved ones and the infantrymen to their doom, so they have asked his forgiveness, for which we weep with shame, pity, and endless grief. Yunus was shocked by the decision of the ruler Boris Mstislav Romanovich to perish along with those of his warriors whom he could not save, and remained with Boris. He ordered his entire army, except for Kaidan's regiment, to retreat, not to the west, where the Ishkuls had retreated, but to the north, so as to scatter the Tatar forces as much as possible. But all the Bulgarians of his regiment were left to die with him. Kurbanas and Beda took their men north. With them went the regiment of Hager-Uglay. Kaidan followed the Saklans westward, for his Beylik Behrman, primary, was there. Bernai, distracting the Tatars in the field while the rest of our forces retreated, also decided to stay with Yunus. The infantryman opened 2 passes for his men in the Tabaira, and then in a terrible skirmish with the Tatars, pursuing Bernai's regiment on their heels, were barely able to close them. In the meantime, the infantrymen managed to entrench themselves and to put up shields in many places, so that the Taba became the dreaded fortress of 2 parts, the outer and the inner Taba. In the outer Tabia, which had been shot through, only the fighting men and the guards remained, and in the inner Tabia, which the arrows did not reach, all the rest. The Tabia held on like this for a whole month, although it was subjected to incessant attacks from the enemy's horsemen and infantry. The besieged learned from the captives that the Tatars, pursuing the retreating Saklans, had killed several Beka, including Subai and his son Bulgar. Subai was the best horseman, and the Tatars could hardly have caught up with him. But when they killed the horse under Bulgar, the father threw him on his horse behind him. The horse took to slowing down, and one of the Tatar archers managed to hit Bulgar. When Subai saw that his son had fallen with an arrow in his back, he flew into a rage, turned the horse and charged at the enemies. The accompanying boyars, commanders, followed him, and each one before his death succeeded in cutting down several enemies. Unable to defeat Subai in a feint, the Tatars shot him with their bows. While the main force of the Arjan Bulgarians, led by Beda, son of Chaya, were fighting at the Almash River, Pereyaslavl, the Muslim-hated Aslap, prince of Pereyaslavl Svetoslav Cherny, attacked the Arjans. The Basala killed the beer of the Arjan Muslims, Sengil, son of Mir Bulat, and 25,000 Muslims, and burned Baltawar, Poltava. The brother-in-law of Sengil, the brother of the Aryans, tried to resist, but was defeated, captured, and imprisoned at Bursalar. Karabataslavl threatened that in the event of an Aryan attack on Bursalar, he would immediately kill Kia. Sengil's son Saifeddin was the Muslim survivor who fled to the north of Aryan to the Udal of Baid's younger brother Arjamak, and he sheltered 20,000 refugees. The atrocities of the Basalians were described in detail by the continuator of Bursalataria Galim, the third son of Mir Bulat, who lived in Karajar, Chernigov. Beda, who had returned from the Almash campaign, had to forget about all this and to occupy himself entirely with the protection and arrangement of the surviving Aryans. And Kurbanas, returning from the war, learned that his elder brother on his father's side, Buliuk, who was jealous of him, had raised a mutiny and separated his Udal, the Tanish Tuba, Kharkov district, from the Jeremel or Budin Beylik of Kurbanas. Kurbanas, wishing, like Beda, to raise an army to help the Almash Taba, could barely muster half a regiment, 4,000 warriors, to defend his Beylik from his mutineer brother. Gaulim writes how angry Kurbanas was: "When I converted before the Almash campaign to Christianism, the Greek faith, I thought that the Orthodox God would help me, but now I see that the Papists have deceived me." And he took to hunting down his Papas Jimyang, Demayan, to hang him, but the nimble Papas managed to escape to the capital of Bishalbi and take shelter under its protection. When he found out that she loved to read, he started writing all sorts of nonsense about her. He wrote a Dastan about Kisan's, Ryazan, demise, about which she said, "Fiction, but very touching." None of the Saklan Beys helped the Almash Taba because of their urgent affairs. After a month of uninterrupted siege, another enemy joined the enemies of Bardaeus and Yunus, hunger. Alarmed by this, Boris summoned Yunus, Nardugan, Bernai, India, Iskandar, Savlai, and Yakub to his tent, and after feasting them on horseflesh, he began reminiscing about the opening in 1200 in Shamlin, Smolensk, of the new stone Bulgarian court, caravanserai, like today's mall, ND, for the AK Bulgarian merchants. The old Bulgarian court, built under Erman Roman Smolensky, the father of Barry's, was located next to it and continued to serve, but the new one built by Barry's eclipsed it in size and amenities. Those who arrived for the opening of the court, Sebeyuga, Igor Sviatoslavich, Mikhail Kara-Bulgar, Michael Vsevolodovich the Saint, Abrash, Rurik Rostislavich, Bishelby, Shambat, Atil Nashkala, Subai, Kursa, Sviatoslav Olgovich, Hager-Uglay, Magyar-Uglay and many other Bakaks and merchants took part in a feast of unprecedented magnitude and splendor, arranged by Barry's, with the help of the drinks merchant Magyar-Uglay, son of the Hungarian. I have never eaten so much and so deliciously anywhere as at this feast, and this feast has been on my mind for several nights, remarked Barris, suddenly turning to the subject of the present trouble. There is a famine, and in a few days we shall have eaten all our horses. Therefore it is the supreme authority which you all unanimously gave me on the second day of the siege. I command all the Buluk Bashes, colonels, of cavalry to proceed to break through next night, and then whatever God grants. This was said so authoritatively that no one chose to object, not even Yunus and Nardugan. An hour before dawn, when all the infantrymen slept like the dead, the faithful Shamlins, headed by the Ulugustaya, engineer, Kuzma, noiselessly opened two passages in the north wall of the Tabaira, and the horsemen of Nardugan, Yunus, and Bernai led the Bulgars out through a hollow to the sleeping camp of the Tartars, while Yunus led his own straight through the camp. Without pausing a moment, the Bulgars flew through the ill-lighted camp and hid in the night step. The two Kyrgyz Tumen, raised on the alarm, tried to catch up with the Bulgars, but, after the fall of several horsemen in the ravines, gave up the pursuit. When it was quite dawn, Bernai noticed someone's watch and warned Yunus of the danger. Yunus ordered the Bulgarians to prepare for a last stand, for their tired horses would not save them from anyone. But the approaching dozers said they were the Kalaiki left behind by Karasan, willing to join Yunus for Ak-Bulgar. When the entire group of 3,000 mounted Kalayans arrived at the Ak-Bulgars, Yunus took all their horses for breeding. He mounted his men on the defended horses, placed the Kolay among the Bulgarian columns, and they continued north. Only when the army reached Chershi, Lipsk, did Yunus allow Nardugan's Barjars to separate and go west. Here in Chershi, on certain days, the patrol units of the Saklans and Ak-Bulgarians were stacked. On the day when Yunus's army arrived in Charsha, the patrols of Ijjim Batavale, Dmitry Putiwalski, the eldest son of Subai, Mstislav Chernigovsky, and of Berbish, the son of Tenrak, the grandson of Kumays Azulog, entered Charsha. Ijjim was Berbish's son-in-law, so their meetings at the station were always very warm. Ijjim went with Nardugan to the west, and Berbish with Yunus and Bernai to the east. From that time on, Yunus and Bernay, who had become friends in the war, were always together. When they arrived at Bulia, Chelbir immediately convened the Council of State, at which they listened attentively to their reports and awarded Yunus the personal title of Emir. When Yunus asked whether the king had received his appeal for help to the Almash Taba, Chelbir replied that he had received it, but that he could do nothing to help Bardais. 3 days before the Battle of Almash, the Tatar army of Karatogrol with 50,000 Turkmen and 20,000 Kyrgyz rushed towards Jake, and 2/3 of the whole force of Ak-Bulgar so far barely held back their onslaught. The remaining forces were not even enough to defend Echka-Bulgar. Under the governor of Sarshin there were only 10,000 reliable fighters at hand and 15,000 allied Karasan's Kalaiks, which were not even enough to maintain order in the strife-torn Sanjak, pre-Caucasus, when Yunus in his desperation asked the king to allow him to strike in the direction of the Almash Taba with the forces of the Burtish Kermish militia. The king informed him that 3 days after his withdrawal from the Taba, it fell and all its defenders perished. I promise you that I will bury in Ulug Bulgar the Ishklite begs who fell in the Almash campaign, hastened Chelbir to add, seeing how Yunus was suffering badly from Dugar's news of the Almash Taba's doom. On the king's orders, builders erected a monument in the form of a polygonal high fence with Uruk, Russian, shields attached to it between Arga-Bazar and the mouth of the Asna. In this monument, which was given the name Monument to the Sons of Beres or Monument to the Uruk Bahadirs, Russian rich men, a little later laid in a specially built beautiful mausoleum the Kapchegs, sarcophagi, with the remains of the 9 Ishklite beats, princes, Beres, Mstislav Romanovich, Subai Mstislav Chernigovsky, Bulgar, Kanil, Sviatoslav Kanevsky, Yashuga, Iziaslav Ingvarovich, Shambat, Sviatoslav Shumsky, Atil Nishkal, Yuri Nezvigensky, Endir, Andrei, and Iskonder. Alexander Dubrovsky, found and brought to Ulug Bulgar, Great Bulgar, by the new Kalgasuba Bey, Ibat. This Ibat, son of Karajar, was ataman of the Anchi *Yerks or Ukras, with whom he passed into the service of the Emir Danil. Ibat was such a trustworthy and decent man that the Bajar Bek Arslan himself married his granddaughter, the daughter of Bulama, Vladimir Igorowich, to him. Ibat was known among his fellow Anchians by the name of Baikazake, Totyam Kol. When he went to war, Bernay handed over power over Kalgasuba to him, and the governor of Sachin Juga confirmed this decision. Ibat repeatedly attacked the Tatars who were crossing near the fords of the Burachai, Dnieper, and drove them to the Murai, Burda, flowing into the Sea of Azov, for which Subiatai fell into a frenzied rage and sent against Ibat Sigakan, with 10,000 Turkmen horsemen and 5,000 infantry. And Ibat kept his fortification Teran Ermak, the deep valley, Peyakop, in exemplary condition, and Sugakan, having lost 3,000 infantrymen in its storming, preferred to return. Sugakan then massacred Ibat's son's 500-man shelter and laughed at the news of Ibat's determination to avenge his son's murderer. This Turkmen bull thought he was untouchable. But it so happened that at the end of the month of Ulukerlark, January 1238, Ibat, having received orders from Yunus to attack the Tatars in Kortjak, sneaked onto the river Bulgate, ostensibly as an ally of Ghazi-Baba, with a letter of invitation from the emir to work for him, and there laid an ambush in the path of the Tatar convoy. It pleased the Most High that the guard of this caravan should be headed by Sugakan. The Anchians felled trees in the middle of the caravan of sledges with food. In the scuffle with the stable guards, Ibat personally killed Sugakan's son Kushtogrol, sign of God, whose 100 had massacred the last defenders of the Almash Taba. Surrounded by enemies, Ibat's detachment perished along with its ataman, but managed to send 2,000 Tatars to hell. For the loss of 1/3 of the troop, Sagakan was put on trial, and although he was not sentenced to death out of respect for his past services, he was discharged to private. He was killed in an attack on Kaziel, Kozlsk, by Kermir's detachment, and his corpse was sent by his cousin Karatogrol to Kurgan, Trans-Caspian, with Batay's message to Ugitai about the retreat of the Mongols from Iskul, Rus. At the end of the month, Sirpain of the Kharasan Suba Subiatai again attacked Ak-Bulgar, but this time from the west. Simultaneously, from the east, Ak-Bulgar was again attacked by Karatogrol. At one point, his Tumen, commanded by the Itbak Bey Karabash, crossed the Jake, and only the bravery of Hager-Uglay's militiamen forced the fierce fighter Karabash to retreat. Karatogrol was dissatisfied with the retreat of the Itbak Bey and demanded that he be put on trial, but enraged by this injustice, Karabash fled with his Tumen into the far expanses of the endless Tubjak steppe and now, from a hunter, became hunted game himself. Before the decisive attack, Hager-Uglay conveyed to Karabash, "Do not seek justice from the Tatars, the weapons of Satan and the sect of the Jehuds, and pass into the service of Ak-Bulgar." But Karabash did not then comprehend the voice of reason and compassion, which he later regretted. Anyone who tied himself to the Tatars, the Mongol conquerors, was sooner or later headed for hell. Glory to the Most High! Fortunately for Ak-Bulgar, the mutiny of Karabash kidnapped part of the forces of Karatogrol and allowed the army of Hager-Uglay to move to defend the approaches to the Bulgarian capitals, Veliki Bulgar and Bulia Bulgar, today Biliar. Subiatai, having lost the last 7,000 infantrymen in a clash with the Ak-Bulgarian volunteers, who missed the cavalry and slaughtered the Tatar infantrymen, led to the Simbirsk passes through Bulgaridel, Volga, 20,000 Mongols, 25,000 Tatar Turkmen and 25,000 Tatar Kyrgyz, including Itbashts, Bulgarians Kyrgyz by origin. On both sides of the Simbirsk passes and on the other bank of the Bulgaridel, around Kermek and around Veliki Bulgar and Bulia Bulgar, the Bulgarian Ulug engineers and builders prepared good fortifications and facilities, traps for the establishment of escalated defenses and ambushes. No doubt, the cunning Subiai tried to move towards the Ulug Bulgarian and Suvar Pass for convenience, but his Tatars stumbled upon one of the Simbir fortifications and turned back after losing 3,000 Kyrgyz. the Tatars had to cross the Simbir Pass, with the help of the Tylgurgi fishermen who happened to be here, and head for Karamek, where the infidels were already waiting for them. The royal army of 24,000 defended fighters led by Gabdullah Chelbir Makir himself. The Bashtu, Kiev-born Chelbir tried to fight no worse than the Bahadurs of Bardayas. In the attack Subiye through his son Urankayate with 5,000 Tatars and 37,000 Turkmen and Kyrgyz. In all points, except in accurate shooting, the Bulgars were inferior to the brilliant army of Beres and the Tatar horde. Only 6,000 Bulgarian Kazanchis, aristocrats, had armor not inferior in quality to that of the Khwarezmian, which all the Tatar warriors had. And in the Beres army 50,000 warriors had similar armor made by Bulgarian craftsmen. When King Ambal, after the death of Emir Colin, began to indiscriminately persecute all his political opponents, almost all the best masters, gunsmiths of the Saburi, Kasai, Cernai and Burai families moved from Veliki Bulgar, Nursuvar and Bulia Bulgar to Kara Bulgar, Chernigov, Bashtu, and especially in the hospitable for the Bulgars Shamlane, Smolensk, of the Bey Danil Erman, the glorious Roman Rostislavich Smolensky. It was not by chance that in Shamlane were the largest outside the boundaries of AK Bulgar Karalkane, weapons workshops of the Saburi, Bulgarian Bazaar, Bulgarian Yard, Caravanserai, and Bulgarian Balik, district of the Bulgarian Muslims. Only in the number of Bulgarian inhabitants Shamlane was still inferior to Kara-Bulgar, where Christian and Muslim Bulgarians made up 2/3 of all citizens, but in the rate of diversification of the Bulgarian population Shamlane had no equal. In 5 to 6 years Beres was able to attract the Bashtu Bulgarians, Berendey, and the Muslim Bulgarians of Kara-Bulgaria to his side and to create with their help a united and powerful Urus state, Rus. She could easily have repelled from its borders the hated horde of the malodorous Tatars, but the heinous treachery of Kalgan and Kharasan prevented Bardayas the Great from sustaining the victory over the Tatars already achieved on the Almash River and led to the death of the best Shamlane Bahadurs. The other Shamlane rulers were not as clever and purposeful as Danlayaman and Ulfberries, from which the dream of a Shamlane great state gradually faded. Georgi Balgaruk, Yuri Dolgoruki, also aspired to turn Korczak into a new great Bulgaria, and under him Korczak was second only to Kara-Bulgar in the number of Bulgarian inhabitants, but after his death his dream also faded away. The Ishkul Papazi, popes, everywhere, secretly and openly, resisted the Muslim Bulgarians in Ishkul. Let us recall how the Papazi of Duloba, Volin, wanted to throw away the body of the Bey Daud, David Igorevic, by a deserted road, and the papists of Kara-Bulgar refused to bury Sebeyuga, Igor Sviatoslavich, in the churches and monasteries, just because these Bakaks openly expressed respect for Islam and Muslims. To lay the Kapchi with the remains of Sebeyuga in a church, as it was proper with the Croatian, Orthodox, only one Papaz of the Batavian church, which the Bey's mother started to build, and his wife finished. Moreover, many Papazas allowed the Yehudi sectarians to settle and spread their influence in Ishkul. The Yehudi Kara-Ustai, emissaries of the House of Naden, exerted influence over Erman of Galicia, Roman of Galicia, and Ulugkoy, Vsevolod of the Big Nest, and completely subordinated the Tylgurgi, Yuri Vsevolodovich Suzdalski, to themselves, Armak Jurgi, Stupid Yuri, Yuri Ingvarovich of Ryazan, and Kara Batislav, Black Sviatoslav, Prince of Pereyaslavl Ruski. Outside the boundaries of Ishkul, the Yehudi Kara-Ustar of the Nadans completely subjugated the Tatars of Kakan Gayak and many of the Tatars, seizing for them the trade routes and destroying their enemies, beginning with the Karajim Shah, Khwarezma, and Mohammed, who without a fight, with only one order of some pitiful Kara-Ustay, handed over to the Tatars a quarter of the whole rich southern world's magnificent armament and armor for 500,000 men, and ending with the Turkmen emirs Kara-Togrul and Kush-Bird, several Uzi, Ogurs, Seljuk, sultans, and many other great and small rulers. It is inexplicable that the Ishklite Beki, who hated Islam with a satanic hatred, helped the House of Naden to spread its pernicious influence in the world. Yarka Khanturii, Andrei Bogolyubsky, who made a terrible pogrom on the Bulgarian quarter in Bashtu, did not touch a single Bashtu Jehud and translated half of them to the best part of Bulimir, Vladimir Suzdalski. To crush the Mongol, Tatar, invasion of the whole white world, paid for by House Naden, would have required 100,000 such heroes as were in the army of Boris and Mstislav Romanovich, but there were no more anywhere. The majority of the Ak-Bulgarian Bahadurs yielded in saber fighting to the Mongols and Ishkuls. This was due to the fact that the Ak-Bulgarians were mainly composed of the Bulgarians who did not excel in warfare, the Bajanaks, Pechenegs, Sebas, Suvars, Cumans, Polovchans, and Alans, and the Saklans, the Slavic Rus Bulgars of the Ukraine, were composed mainly of the most warlike Bulgars, the Baranjars, Kalbians, Kowui, Urus Barsals, Kara-Bulgarians, Avars, and Kai-Abdali or Turkmen. Viewed as a whole, there were only 3 armies in the Ak-Bulgarian army, composed to a considerable extent of descendants of the Abduls, that is, the army of Yunus and of his father Hager-Uglay or Zarep-Zaid, also Abduls by descent, and the army of the Abduls descendant Duga-Sarshin al-Bulgari. And only these 3 armies attacked the Tatars together with the Ishklites of Bardayas, during which time the other Ak-Bulgarian armies only defended themselves. And am I not right? And Chelbir in the Battle of Kermek, which would later also be called the Battle of Kherezm and the Battle of Aries, also did not prevent the advance and was only seeking to stop the enemy with his defensive actions. If Subiatai had earlier passed his reserve through Bulgar-Idol, Urinkaitai would have repulsed the royal army. But when the Tatar reserve had barely begun to load onto the ships of the Kortjaks, the Hager-Uglay's regiment suddenly rushed onto the battlefield and, with a single senior strike of its attackers in motion, forced Urinkaitai to surrender. Hager-Uglay had won a great victory for Ak-Bulgar, not losing a single warrior. The awestruck Chelbir, immediately, on the battlefield, put his juba, royal cloak, on Hager-Uglay and proclaimed him emir. The escaped from Tatar captivity Bek Ablashin, Ploskinia, the Poor Springs, told the victorious Kurultai about the doom of the defenders of the Almash Taba, Laga. After the retreat of Yunus men, the infantrymen held out for 3 more days. On the first of these days Subjatay forced Ablashin to convey to Bardayas an offer to surrender in exchange for the preservation of his life. When the Bek entered the Taba, he saw all the infantry wounded and no less than half lying on the ground in utter helplessness. Baris, holding a bloody bandage on his left shoulder with his right hand, apologized for not being able to embrace the Beaker and invited them into his tent, where his 2 Beaker were struggling from severe wounds. "The Tatars are beating us with poisoned arrows. It is clear that they will not capture us," remarked the Ulag Emir, great ruler, Bardayas. He was the only Ishklite Bek who received this highest Bulgarian title from King Chelbir. Ablashin, who had come to Baris on Nowruz, March 22, 1223, together with Beg Ibat at the behest of Emir Bokman, took off his Kalansubga, high Bulgarian hat, Gugla, in deference to the Ulag Emir, and was embarrassed into silence. "I see you bring us an invitation to a live Tatar dran," smiled Bardayas. "What, do the vampires promise to keep heaven and life for us?" Ablashin nodded silently. Baris asked Kazma to bring the terms of surrender to everyone, and he, who had a sharp tongue, shouted to the whole camp, "Whoever has shit in his pants can use this pan to get out of the Taba, so it won't stink in the Taba." The majority of the infantrymen laughed, and one of them added, to defecate more, "There's nothing to it, we haven't eaten anything for the 3rd day, we're only getting drunk." When the 2,000 Basui infantrymen decided to leave the camp with Ablashin, none of the remaining ones condemned them, and Bardayas even bowed to them and said, "Thank you." Only Kazma murmured, "You are going for Tatar Sherpa, soup, just see that you don't fall into the cauldron yourselves." After 2 days, beating off 3 more Tatar assaults, the infantrymen withdrew to the inner Taba. When the 3rd day of the last battle of Baris and his infantrymen came, the Tatars surrounded the inner Taba and shot all its defenders with arrows. Subjatay spared only Kazma, for he was an engineer. All the Ishklite begs had already died of their wounds. Baris was the last to die at dawn. Subjatay ordered his silent men to push the corpses of the beys into the gaps between the shields and announced to the army that he had killed the captured Uruk beys with the shields. And the Tatars also killed the infantrymen who had surrendered before. During more than a month's siege of the Almash Taba, Yunus's Ishkul infantrymen and Ak-Bulgarians killed 10,000 horsemen and 10,000 infantrymen of the enemy. Data of losses of the army of Baris: all the Bashtu, Kiev, 10,000 infantrymen died, All the Shamlane 5,000 infantrymen died. Of the 5,000 Bajars of Nardugan 1,500 remained alive. Of the 10,000 Galicians of Orden Mstislav Udolski, 4,000 remained alive. Out of 5,000 Bearman Turks 1,000 people remained alive. Out of 10,000 Kara-Bulgarians of Subai, Mstislav Chernigovsky and Kozelski, 3,000 people remained alive. Out of 5,000 Siberian Bulgarians 2,000 people remained alive. Out of 5,000 Kalbians of Alish, Alyosha Popovich, 2,500 people remained alive. Data on the losses of the army of Yunus. Of 6,000 Berta Bulgarians of Yunus, 1,000 people remained alive. Of 6,000 Arjun, Poltava, Bulgarians of Beda, 2,000 people remained alive. Of 6,000 Kalgay Bulgarians of Bernai, mainly Jaldai, Crimeans, 1,000 people remained alive. Of 6,000 Burman, Black Sea, Bulgarians of Kaidan, 3,500 people remained alive. Data of the losses of the Tatar army in the Battle of Almash. Of 25,000 Tatars on Subiatai, 20,000 people remained alive. Of 50,000 Turkmen on Kushbird, 25,000 people remained alive. Of 35,000 Kyrgyz, 25,000 people remained alive. Of 20,000 Mihan, Azerbaijani, infantrymen, 10,000 people remained alive. Of 7,000 Kolay on Kalgan and Kharasan, not a single one remained alive. The horsemen of the Ishklites lost 20,000 men in the battle, and 22,500 men in the retreat. The Ak-Bulgarians lost 10,000 men in battle, and 10,000 more in the defense of the Tabar and in the retreat. The enemy lost 5,000 Tatars, 25,000 Turkmen and 10,000 Kyrgyz, in the pursuit all 3,000 people, and in the siege of the Almash Tabar, 10,000 horsemen and 10,000 infantry. At the end of the month July, the governor of Sachin Juga attacked the Tatar Tumen of Kurup standing in Jurash, Dagestan, and pressed him to Shay, Don. In doing so, Juga's fighters, who were forcibly assisted by the Kolay of the unrevealed traitor Kharasan, killed 4,000 of the enemy and 10,000 of the enemy's mercenaries. Subiatai praised his lover Karan for his firmness and joined his men to his army. The Tatars marched to Karamek with 70,000 horsemen and 7,000 infantry. In the beginning, the northern or heavy march against Ak-Bulgar, 1222–1223, was led by Juchit's son Chambek, with whom his brothers Chuki, Karan, Budusha, and Kumai were in this campaign. Chambek behaved very presumptuously and at first he was successful. So, as he was engaged in reconnaissance with Subjatay's son, his friend Kicha Chambek, at Burache he came under fire from the Bulgarian-Cuban reconnaissance. Kaidan attacked Kicha Chambek's Tumen from the front, and Yunus and Alish from the flanks. In this first Almash, Kalkin, campaign, Khan Chambek, killed by Almash, and all the Tatar Kurds, died. After that the heavy march was led by Tukay Timur, but at first none of his brothers listened to him. Budusha and Kumay took to pursuing the Bulgarians and Ishkuls retreating from Almash, although Tukay did not want them to do so, and then pounced on the Bardayas Tabar, although Tukay offered to let the besieged go. It was only after Urinkaitai with Budusha and Kumai were taken prisoner that Tukay brought the situation under control. He, threatening to instigate a lawsuit for Subiai's guilt over Chambek's death, forced him to surrender to the Bulgarians, after which he negotiated with Chelbir for a prairie. With the king's permission, he went to see the captives Budusha and Kumai, and told them that Chelbir would allow him to decide for himself whether or not to beg their release from captivity. The brothers wept and on their knees begged forgiveness from him for their disobedience and took an oath to obey him always and in everything. Juchi approved of the conduct of Tukay, who was his favorite, and delivered Karajim, Kharezm, into his possession and that of his descendants. Chelbir understood perfectly well that the Almash campaign and the heroism of the Ishklite Bayaks led by Ulugh Beris, Boris the Great, Mstislav Romanovich, saved Ak-Bulgar. Therefore, by the decree of the Tsar, in 1224 the participants of the Tarjais feast held in Veliki Bulgar the right remembrance of Beris and his sons. At it they also mentioned the beaker of the cowboys, Aliash, although he was buried by the cowboys in Batavale, Putival. During this rite the Bulgar king and the most personable people of Ak-Bulgaria accompanying him approached the Uruz Bilgis on the outskirts of the Balik of Ulug Bulgar, Subai, dismounted from their horses, and took bal cups in their hands. The king said, "We bear witness that Ulf Baruiz and his sons fought in Almash, in the Kalgan Suba district of the Saxon province of Ak-Bulgaria against the accursed enemies of our land and faith, the Tatars, and that they all fell with valor defending our Bulgarian land. We have sealed their exploit in our annals and in our hearts. And we shall not tire of praying to the Most High that such glorious Bahadirs, like Bardaeus and his sons, were born on Bulgarian soil, and that our people, so fond of Bulgarian soil and so self-sacrificing as Ulug Barday. In confirmation that the Bulgarian people remember the exploits of Bardaeus and his sons and admire them, let us drink this ball." Of course, Chelbia and the whole Bulgarian people were also proud of the Battle of Ovnesh, and the king himself decreed, "I order that the town of Kermek be also called by the name of Horum, in memory of the fact that under its walls the Bulgarian army held a brilliant victory, like the glorious victory of the Bulgarian Parthians over the Uramites, Romans, under Horum, Karimi." Moreover, King Gabdullah Chelbia, son of Otiak or Chermuishil, in commemoration of the Battle of Kermek, bestowed upon his brother Mirgazi the honorific name of Karemsha, king of Korum, a Chermuishil Uluri, son of Otiak. Did not Mirgazi lead the army at the height of the Battle of Kermek? In turn, Mirgazi gave Chelbia the honorific name Badam, old, Karemsha Chermuishil Uluri. But at that both Gabdullah Chelbia and Mirgazi were fond of repeating, the valor of Bardaeus and his sons was the mother of the Battle of Kermek. Larish and Barak, Yaslav Vsevolodovich, used to talk about the Almaris and Kermek battles and other events when they were steaming in the bath. Then Barak said, "This clan of the Cumans, the Popovites, whom somebody drove out of the steppes, have from this time fled the world in search of a new corner for themselves. On the advice of this Jehud, he forbade us, his brethren, to give aid to the Saklans, Ukrainian Rus, in their war with the Tatars. And I, the sinner, even rejoiced when the Tatars defeated the Saklans, and then attacked Volga, Bulgaria too. We were all then very angry with the Saklans and with Chelbia when the Karaunj robber Elias seized Juktum. Chelbia blamed us, the Suzdalites, for this attack, for which he plundered and devastated all our possessions in Bearman, Pomerai, Podvini, Izinkish Terma, Kostroma. And his Karaundashlik Radjov, which he himself gave under the rule of Tuinchek Tihonia, Sviatoslav Vsevolodovich, took that he ruined it, in 1219, so for nothing. When Barash, the Ak-Anders of Ak-Bulgar, decided to become a Balinese Ak-Anders and became one, Chelbia again illegally burned his town of Dzunbulgar in 1221. And behold, Jurgis got angry and said, "King Chelbia does not consider us as people at all," and started fighting with Chelbia from the Beylik of Barash. And all of us supported Jurgis, because each of us was indebted to him for something. But Jurgis was guilty of lying to us, on the advice or orders of his Magais, and representing the Almash and Kermek battles as minor skirmishes. Alas, I only learned the truth about them in 1232 from the letter of Altynbek, Bulgarian king, 1229 to 1236. Had I known this truth about the battles in 1229, I would not have reconciled with Jurgi, and in removing him from power I would have immediately made a truce with Altynbek. And in 1232, Jurgi, by various stratagems, deprived me in Bolin of everything, and I could no longer take any action against him. But Barak did not tell Larish the whole truth that was in this letter. Incidentally, Larish had read this letter, the Ghazi-Baba had intercepted this letter in Balain, and after the conclusion of the treaty with Boyan Mohammed for a Vasum non-aggression on Chulman, Karma, and in Talad Bulgarwan, had handed over this letter to him. Altynbek's letter reported not only these battles, but also the capture by the king's men in the fight with the Tatars of Batay, 2 men of Tyljurgi, sons of his boyar Tudor, Fyodor, and Legdan, Lokatok. At the interrogation they testified that they had been sent by Jurgi to Subatay on the Tyna Argarish II as early as 1223 to deliver letters from the Tatar chieftains for the Balinese Bek. Among them was the letter for Weza Maghis and Tyljurgi from Kakan Gayuk, but they managed to tear it up and only a piece of it with Gayuk's seal survived. But Larish did not tell Barak that he had read the letter, perhaps the Bek did not want to tell him the details. He only asked Barak, "And what happened to Magais?" To which the latter readily replied, "He was captured by the beardless Urus Karali and hanged from the first tree, for he had done them much mischief. If he had fallen to me, I would have done so to him also." But of these diplomatic talks Larish immediately forgot when he saw Ak-Bulgaria. The Urus Barsals, who were considered the ancestors of all the Urus, were famous for imprisoning women. This custom they adopted from the Abbasids, Adigians, Abkhazians, when they lived in Tamiyan, western Pre-Caucasus. Outwardly it may be said that Barak broke the custom of the Urusites when he allowed Larish to meet his daughters. However, another custom of the Urusites permitted the meeting of youths with maidens, female line descendants, and on this side Barak acted strictly according to the custom of the Urusites, so Ak-Bulgaria, Laysan, and Larish were third-generation descendants, i.e. the maidens were third cousins of Larish, of Bishelbi. After the meeting of the youths followed conversations and actions understandable only to those initiated into Bulgarian customs. Larish said to Ak-Bulgaria, "The dry porridge will stick in your throat." This meant that Larish paid attention to Ak-Bulgaria and asked her to give him a ball. Without looking up, Ak-Bulgaria handed Larish the ball. When Larish had drunk the bowl, he told Ak-Bulgaria that he now wanted to have breakfast. Ak-Bulgaria handed the bowl to her sister and passed the porridge with meat to Larish. Larish ate a spoonful of porridge and handed the spoonful of porridge to Ak-Bulgaria himself. Then Larish ate almost all of the meat, leaving Ak-Bulgaria with only one piece, and Ak-Bulgaria ate all of the remaining porridge from the spoon that Larish brought to her lips. This meant that Larish and Ak-Bulgaria liked each other, and Larish proposed to Ak-Bulgaria to become his bride. Then Ak-Bulgaria and Laysan went out in silence, and Ak-Bulgaria only before going out dared to look at the Ak-Bulgarian prince for a moment. That moment was enough for Larish to see that his chosen one's eyes were burning with happiness. All this was seen not only by Barak and some servants, but also by the painters and advisors of the Balinese Bek, crowding at the entrance of the hall. "This is our Bulgarian way," said Barak, casting his relatives a look of peace. Such a look of the Albak they had rarely seen, and almost without any delay and very amicably they supported Barak's thought. The feast was very glorious, and the boyars, endeavoring to please the landlord, spoke one through the other of the Bulgarianness of the Urus and of the necessity of the Urus and the Besaman, vulgar Bulgarians, rising together against the common enemy. When Larish awoke the next day in the chambers appointed for him, and after putting himself in order and praying, the servants escorted him to the landlord. He was sitting in the family dining room behind a table laid with various dishes, and at the appearance of Larish, he stood up and put himself to sit beside him. They breakfasted just the two of them and managed to agree on all matters. Barak agreed that Kashturma, Rajgil and Junbulgar during the war of Boyan with the Tatars, remained under the authority of Boyan Mohammed, on condition that Kadai ambassadors should be present in these towns for the joint settlement of any disputes. Larish promised that Mengu Bulgar would not make war on Kortjak or send any troops into its territory. In response, Barak said that he would not object to the transfer of Arthapi regiments to Ak-Bulgar through Jarnagalij territory. It was decided not to return each other's fugitives until calmer times came. "God grant that our parties may carry out these arrangements," remarked Barak after the negotiations. One of his maids showed herself at the door, but did not enter the dining room, expecting an invitation. Barak gave her a sign with his hand. She entered and placed on the table the plate from which Ak-Bulgaria had fed Larish before the feast of porridge and meat. The plate was empty. Both Larish and Barak beamed. This meant that Ak-Bulgaria had eaten the piece of meat left by Larish early in the morning, and thus expressed her consent to become the prince's bride. Barak held out his hand to Larish and they embraced. After this show of parental approval of the mutual love between Larish and Ak-Bulgaria, Barak said to the prince, "Now go to Jarnagalij and attend to the affairs there, and after you are settled there, send the in-laws here, and I will bless your marriage with Ak-Bulgaria. You remind me much of my eldest son Tudor, Theodore. Genghis took him away from me and tried to make a likeness of him, but my son still came back to me, in 1232. Georgi, under a treaty with the Tatars for joint action against Ak-Bulgar, sent my still very young Tudor together with his son Saint-Bulat, Vsevolod, on a campaign against Burtas, promising them an easy victory. So it was that almost the whole army of your grandfather Altynbek then fought with him against the Tatars of Batay at Bugulma. But Hager-Uglay succeeded in arriving at Bugulma with his army, and Altynbek was able to send to Berta's your father Boyon's detachment. Boyon arrived early to set up an ambush. When some of his men, appearing to be seen by Suabulat, turned in feigned flight towards the place of ambush, Suabulat said to Tudor, "I have defeated the heartless. Do you not wish to distinguish yourself, if only in pursuit?" Tudor, hastening to prove to me that he had become a valiant warrior, rushed joyfully towards the trap, and there received a grievous wound in his breast. Afterwards he told me that the wound was insignificant, but the next year his wound opened and he died on his wedding day. The guests sat down at the wedding table, but now to remember him. On the same day I committed a sin. I wished the doom of Genghis and all his family, and unfortunately, this curse came to pass. I was not able to marry Tudor, but I will do all I can to make the wedding happen, so that with every right to call you my son I will give you 100 of the best warriors in the world. They will not let even an arrow fly to you. When you make friends in Jana Galij with my now eldest son Alexander Nevsky, I know that you two are honest and will be able to become each other's trustworthy friends. Be careful in Jana Galij, do not fraternize with anyone there. The people there are motley and they can kill you there just because of one envy and jealousy. All my life I tried to turn the Yonagalid's Turalake, Novgorod Republic, into a Beylik principality, but it never remained a robber Turalake. Larish, elated at the thought of his soon-to-be marriage to Argabika, light-heartedly set out from Bulama to Jana Galij. Before his departure for Kortjak, Boyon Mohammed said to him, "When you are going to deal with Barak, Yaroslav Vsevolodovich, remember that this frail-looking, but in reality very wiry Bek, has been so called, not only on account of his fierce combativeness and command, but also because of his iron grip in every matter. He has a very high opinion of himself, and does not wish to be insulted, therefore he obeys neither us nor the Tartars. He is a decisive piece on the chessboard in the life of Mengu-Bulgaria, Volga Bulgaria. He's off on something, but he's moving in the direction we need him to. As long as this Barak, terrible to all Ishkuls, is with us, Mengu-Bulgaria will be invulnerable to the Tartars." In Jana Galij Larish did make friends with Alexander Nevsky, and when he returned to Kortjak he went with him. In 1242, when Alekjan was preparing for the Battle of Lake Nerma, Lake of Chud, Larish met alongside him another regiment of Artanians, Baltic, who had agreed to serve Mengu-Bulgar. No sooner had 6,000 Shambutians, Jumgalis and Mark Bashas arrived at Larish's camp when a messenger came from Alekjan and conveyed to him his request, "Brother, if I am dear to you, help." The Karatan, Crusaders, and the Kaljavais, here mercenaries of the Crusaders, about 27,000 in number, are pressing me into a bare field where I and my Galigians are in danger of perishing, and my younger brother Andrew is delayed. If you help us now, you will not see me alive again. Forgive me, brother." Larish with his regiment immediately headed for Lake Nerma and managed to flank the attacking Karatuans. The Karatuans, stunned by the surprise, took to moving against Larish's warriors, but they prevented them, hacking them with their long axes and stabbing them with their heavy spears. In the very midst of this fight in Deir, Andrei arrived, and at his attack the Karathans had already fled. As booty Larish received 2,000 pieces of fine armor, purchased another 1,000 from the other victors, and armed his regiment splendidly. Alekjan was so pleased with the victory that he allowed thousands of Galicians to go and serve in Mengu-Bulgar with their armor. The Shumbuts were led by the Boer, Prussian, B. Narim, son of Kors. He went to serve the Bulgarian king at the invitation of his father Caves, who remained living in Mengu-Bulgar, converted to Islam and took the name Hafiz. Narim followed his father's example and stayed forever in Mengu-Bulgar, becoming Narim Bey. The Jumguls or Shukguls and the Markbash were led by Terma, whose name the Pashas quickly changed to Terma. He was the tallest of all the warriors, and they immediately called him Tau Terma, Balkan, the High Terma. The Galician 1,000 were headed by Agon Sakimphius, for which reason his people took to calling them Agon Bashi, Agon's Gshvi. All of them, with few exceptions, remained in Mengu-Bulgar. The Artanians were chiefly settled on the banks of the Middle Misha, a tributary of the Kama, where their strongholds became Shedka, Shatki, and Shauli or Shali. A number of Artanians, headed by the son of Narim Bey, Subai, were settled with the Agan-Bashis, Novorodians, in Tel Suba, between the Vochka and Lower Misha, where Subai founded the town of Subakala, and the son of Agon Nil, or Nalgazi, the town of Nalgazi. Under King Altynbek, Ak-Bulgaria armor makers of the house of Kichiburai, who after the Tatar attack on Bulia in 1236 were transferred from Ulug-Bulgar to Kazan. Kazan began to receive really large-scale military orders, but only under King Boyon Mohammed did they reach the size of the production of the Shamlin Saburi, 2,000 heavy armors per year. The Magyars and the Balaks, Hungarians and Poles, spread in Kermek, Western Europe, before the war, with the Tatars, the fashion of Bulgarian tunics, shubas, lined with treated leather, and from 1187 Bulgarian caravans with treated leather dominated all the roads in Kermek. In late 1242 and early 1243, the Altynbek regiment was placed under the command of Beg Yalchagul Hafiz, son of Mehmetkel. Mehmetkel fell with his men on the first day of the month of Kazan, September, 1236 in battle with the Tatars, and Yalchagul burned with only one dream, to fully avenge the Tatars for the death of his father. His Sabashis, colonels, became Narim Bey, Agon, and Tauturma. When, in the winter of 1243, 3 Tatar tumans of Burultai, Karamalay, and Baitima tried to take Mengu-Bulgar and in 3 columns crossed the Chulman in the space from Saragtau, Soroki Gori, to Jukatin, today Chistopol, they immediately encountered the maze of Baranjar ramparts covered with ice and fired with arrows by the crossbowmen. From the grove, opposite the Tatars, wandering among the ramparts under constant fire, the Baranjars attacked, who, after a crossbow volley, seized the heavy spears and long axes. Abandoning a third of their men in the maze of ramparts, the Tatars barely scrambled back to the forest at Mishi, but here were attacked by Hafiz's regiment, i.e. Yalchagul. With a scramble of previously felled trees, the Artanians of Shedka, Shauli, and Tauturma divided another third of the enemy into groups of 20 or 25 and cut them down with their long axes. The last third of the enemies from Shauli fled out of Mengu-Bulgar, Kazan, on the ice of the Misha, but at Kirby, a place with high banks, and this last way was overrun with trees by Agon. The majority of the remaining Tatars, together with Karamalai, were slaughtered here by the Agan-Bashi and the Artanians. Only Baitima with a handful of men managed to escape from this trap and surrendered to the Baranjars of Bakhtiar, the son-in-law of Goluberkit. And Baruldai I at the very first shaft knew the utter doom of the enterprise, and, after pretending to be badly wounded, managed to escape to Burda, a district of Orenburg. His tumen was brought to hell by his son Kurt, who had been killed by the Bar Rangers. Baruldai's brother's tumen, Kalmak, tried to help the dying Tatar army, but the Bagraj or Barajis of Jurash, the son of Boyon Mohammed, jumped out against Kalmak from the direction of Shiga, Shigurovo, and forced Kalmak to hide in Burda. Kurbanas having warned Batay of the pogrom the march, and resolutely refusing to take part in it, Batay, after some hesitation, married him to his sister Bort, and raised him to the rank of his Baklayaribek and Yugur viceroy of Middle Shi, while Baruldai dismissed him and sent him as centurion to the tumen of Kalmak. It was only under Bekai that Baruldai was promoted again. Altynbek, the daughter of Kurbanas and Bort, married Galimbek, the son of Ghazi-Baba. After late in the same year 1239, the palace of Barak was visited by Hakan Bekai. He approved of Barak's arrangements with Boyon Mohammed, and although he was in favor of recognizing the independence of Mengu-Bulgar, he informed the Bey of his plans for joint action. When the Kakan expressed a desire to marry Barak, the Bey introduced him to his daughter Laysan, who soon became Berkai's wife. Larish remained Mengu-Bulgar's ambassador to Kortjak until 1262. In that year, Kakan Bekai returned the city of Kazan to Boyon Mohammed, and for Boyon's refusal to take tribute from part of Kortjak, he handed over Echka Bulgar, Zakami with the city of Veliki Bulgar, to Mengu-Bulgar. Soon after, Boyon Mohammed died and Larish Istan became king of Mengu-Bulgar. His capital became the town of Echka Kazan or Iskiaka, Inner Kazan or Old Ask, founded by Boyon Mohammed in 1247. This tract was called Sizo and Arkabalik. Here in 1282, after a reign of 20 years, 1262 to 1282, Larish ended his earthly journey. During his reign, in 1277, the Khakan Mankai Taima, Mengu Taima, 1266–1282, asked him to hand over Ak-Bulgaria again under the rule of Kara-Ulis, or Data, but he was refused and attacked Mengu Bulgar. Then the old man Yunus refused to give up the Balik of Tartayak or Janatanish, around the old Bulia, and said, "Let Janatanish become my Almash Taba." For 2 years he held this Balik, when it is sometimes called New Bulia, and fell heroically into it with his whole regiment. Each of his warriors sent no less than 3 Tartars to hell, and Mankai Taima, frightened by such fierceness, did not resolve to go on alone, and sent his nephew Karaim Taima away beyond Chulman with 2 Tumen. But what happened to Karaim Taima also happened to Karamalay, 2,000 Kashan Karsaks Barajars of Mohammed Goli, son of Bithiar, 6,000 descendants of the Artanians and Agan Bashis, and 4,000 Chermishes, small Bulgarian knights, turned the army of Karaim Taima into nothing, and the leader of the Chali Chermishes, Urazai, son of Kai Tai, with an accurate shot sent Karaim Taima straight to hell.